Hello everyone, welcome to yet another session of the daily news analysis by SRIRAM'S IAS, where we take up the important articles featuring in the Hindu newspaper and break them down for our understanding from the UPSC examination point of view. So let's start our today's discussion by taking the important articles which feature in the New Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper, and with it let's take up our first article for the day, which reads COP15 Summit adopts historic biodiversity deal. Now, this article appears in the newspaper. We had a similar discussion on this particular topic yesterday as well, and today the summit has concluded and the COP15, or yesterday what we saw, the UN Convention on Biodiversity, the UNCBD summit, got concluded in Montreal, Canada, and it approved a historic Paris-style deal to protect and reverse dangerous loss to global biodiversity at the UN COP15 summit in Canada. So it is said that a historical deal has been approved, and it is similar to the Paris style deal which happened in the UN climate change conference in Paris in 2015. So a similar deal which took place in the climate change negotiation, a similar deal has taken place in the CBD negotiations as well. So we'll understand what this deal is about, what UN CBD is all about, what is the importance of this summit and the features of this deal and the important points thereof. So let's understand first about why this summit becomes important. We all give much importance to the climate change summit whenever it is there, is held every year. But the UN CBD summit is given less importance, whereas this summit also forms a larger part of the UN climate change summit only, and it was the same time during the Rio 1992 climate change summit that the CBD convention was also signed. So even this summit holds a lot of importance, but it does not get enough attention in the media. But it is very important to see what the topic of this particular summit is and exactly which issue this summit tries to focus upon, and that is it wants to conserve global biodiversity. And when we talk about biodiversity, it means that all the plant and animal species and the ecosystems around them, the existence and flourishing of these ecosystems forms a part of the global biodiversity. And when we talk about the state of biodiversity today, it is a very dismal state where we all keep hearing news about the devastating loss to biodiversity each passing day. So to give certain perspective, based on current trends, the UN estimates that an estimated 34,000 plant species and 5,200 animal species, including 1 in 8 of the world's bird species, face extinction. These many plant and animal species of the world, according to the UN, are being threatened by extinction, and the reason for this obviously are a host of activities where the anthropogenic activities are also a big cause for them, where the humans are a big reason why the biodiversity for these kind of species is depleting, that they are facing extinction. Then about 30% of the breeds of main farm animal species are also currently at high risk of extinction. Again, this is due to use of pesticides, use of not quality fodder. Even the farm animal breeds are facing extinction. Then forests are home to much of the known terrestrial biodiversity. We know that, but at least 45% of the Earth's original forests are gone. So this is a trend which we've been looking at for the past many years, where human beings, for their own material advantage, be those for the trees or other stuff, they started culling the forest, and now the situation has come to a stage where close to 45% of the Earth's original forests are gone. And that is why we even see the similar kind of encroachment happening in the Amazon rainforests, which are also known as the lungs of the earth, but even they are indiscriminately used, and the trees are cut to make use of the commercial applications for the country and the companies. So we see that even the forests are not spared, and if the ecosystems only would not exist, how will the biodiversity exist or the species exist in the planet? So monitored wildlife populations have seen a devastating 69% drop on an average since 1917. This is a very significant number. Since 1970, 69% of all the species have seen a drop in their numbers, which means that either those species are not able to survive, either they are poached for some or the other thing, they are seeing a drop in their population. This is according to the Living Planet Report 2022 of the World Wildlife Fund, or WWF. These are some of the startling figures which I thought must be looked at first in order to understand why this summit and why just some people coming together talking about conserving global biodiversity is very important. And it should not just stay with those people who discuss the solutions for conservation, but certain practical and executionary steps should also be taken so that certain results are achieved on ground. So therefore, this summit becomes important, and whatever plans or proposals are put in the summit also hold a lot of importance. So now let's understand what India tried to achieve in this summit. So India also took part in the summit, and its main focus or agenda was to approve or demand for a dedicated fund based on the concept of CBDR, which is also known as common but differentiated responsibilities. If we elaborate on this concept, this is much similar to what India has a stand in the climate change negotiation. We also had a discussion on the climate change negotiation, and we saw that the loss and damage fund was approved in this year's climate change conference, which essentially says that those countries, those developed countries which were the initial perpetrators of climate change, and it is because of their activities that climate change has reached up to this levels. And yes, developing countries are also contributing, but they were the ones who joined late to the party, and the parties who are suffering most from the climate change, those are the least developed countries or the coastal countries. They often are seen that they do not have any hand in causing climate change. So in order to balance this liability perspective, a loss and damage fund was established in this year's climate change summit, which itself was a historic move. And on similar lines, this similar kind of fund has been achieved in this particular summit as well, and it was India's demand to approve of such a fund, which would not just be contributed by all parties, but those developed countries or parties who were initially more well-to-do should contribute in the same proportionate manner. So that was India's efforts, and one can say that that has largely been achieved in the deal, because a major achievement is the commitment to $20 billion in international finance flows by 2025 and $30 billion by 2030 is the deal that has been accepted by the developing nations, where they have agreed that at least by 2030 a corpus of $30 billion would be pledged by them to support international finance in achieving better alternatives to conserve biodiversity. And the second good thing about the deal is that and such is the nature of things right now, where just the acknowledgement of things that are going wrong, so agreeing on a shared global goal that will guide collective and immediate action to halve and reverse nature loss by 2030 is an exceptional feat for those that have been negotiating the global biodiversity framework, and a win for the people and the planet. These are some of the experts that have the view that when there's such a big conference, and we all know that many parties even refuse to believe the concept of climate change, or that the biodiversity loss is happening and that something should be done for it. So the mere fact that parties have come together and agreed on certain plans to work together to conserve biodiversity is also a big step. So these are the major achievements of the deal. Now let's take a look at what are the action targets. We had taken up this yesterday as well when we discussed the UN CBD. This particular UN summit actually has a 21 action oriented plan, which range from adopting various activities and encouraging those activities and taking steps in order to conserve the biodiversity. So they range from bringing at least 30% of land and sea under the world's protected areas, then also getting 50% greater reduction in the rate of introduction of invasive alien species, and control the flow and import and export of alien species, because we all know the menace of alien species, and reducing nutrients lost to the environment by at least half, and pesticides by at least 2/3, and eliminating the discharge of plastic waste. And then also adopt nature-based contributions to global climate change mitigation efforts of at least 10 gigaton CO2 per year, and that all mitigation and adaptation efforts avoid negative impacts on biodiversity. These are parts of the 2030 action targets which the UN CBD in its form of summit has. So this was a discussion with respect to this topic, and with this let's move on to our next article for the day. The next article which appears in the newspaper reads, "What are carbon markets and how do they operate?" Again, now this article is appearing in the newspaper, which again pertains to the environment section. But why is this article come up? Because the Energy Conservation Amendment Bill of 2022 was passed in the Parliament. This was an amendment to the Energy Conservation Act of 2001, and this particular act has been amended via the Amendment Bill of 2022. And a unique feature in this Energy Conservation Amendment Bill is that the government has brought out a new scheme of carbon markets into the economy, wherein the carbon trading would take place. So through this article, we'll understand what exactly is carbon trading or carbon markets. What do we know when we say by carbon credits or carbon offsets? What are all these terms? What is the meaning of them? Are they any good? What are the positives that come out of these instruments? What are the concerns with respect to this thing? And what are some of the issues experts are having with respect to this Energy Conservation Bill of 2022? So let's understand them one by one. Let's start by first understanding what exactly is carbon markets. Now, when we are into this discussion of combating climate change and keeping the country's or the planet's overall temperature less than by 2 degrees Celsius, where we know that the overall temperature of the planet has been increasing by at least 1 degree Celsius. So we need to keep it down by at least 2 degrees Celsius, and that is the target. And to achieve this target, various modes are used. Various countries we see indulge themselves into unconventional sources of energy, renewable forms of energy. Apart from doing all that, their activities, especially the companies who do it, it is their tendency to release CO2 in the various process. So whatever processes they undertake, carbon dioxide is released, and it is this pledge that all the companies and countries take, that is to reduce this carbon dioxide. Here is where the concept of carbon trading or carbon credits come in, where the one company or any entity who wants to reduce their carbon dioxide can either undertake the first method of actually reducing the carbon dioxide emission, or the second method is of carbon trading, where they can purchase carbon credits from someone who is either selling those carbon credits or from a regulator. And these carbon credits would actually mean that one carbon credit would say that 1 ton of CO2 has been reduced or sequestrated from the atmosphere. So in this way, the pledge of fulfilling the promise that the carbon dioxide was saved from the atmosphere, that would have been fulfilled by the entity, and this is the concept of carbon credits. This was first seen in Article 6 of the 2015 Paris Agreement, is where from it find its relevance, which provides for the use of international carbon markets by countries to fulfill their nationally determined contributions to keep global warming within 2 degrees Celsius. So how do these carbon markets come in? They're essentially a tool for putting a price on carbon emissions, right? Like we saw, any kind of carbon emission that has been happening, carbon emission meaning the release of carbon dioxide and other carbon gases with respect to different processes. So they are a mechanism to put a price to these carbon emissions, and they establish trading systems where carbon credits or allowances can be bought and sold by corporate entities and other people. So a carbon credit is a kind of a tradable permit as per UN standards, equal 1 ton of carbon dioxide removed, reduced or sequestered from the atmosphere. So this is the concept of carbon trading or buying or selling carbon credits, where one carbon credit would mean that 1 ton of carbon dioxide has been removed or reduced or sequestrated from the atmosphere, and that certificate would be given to whosoever holds the credit, and by that he or she would have been fulfilling their pledge to reduce the carbon emissions. So why is this concept becoming very famous? Because a United Nations Development Program release this year noted that interest in carbon markets is growing globally. 83% of the NDCs, or the nationally determined contributions submitted by countries, mention their intent to make use of international market mechanisms to reduce these greenhouse gas emissions. So here we see a very deep interest in indulging into carbon markets by countries and companies, where they're looking at it as a very good instrument to take care of their carbon emissions. But now the question still comes that if a corporate entity or any other entity is buying a carbon credit, and which would be equivalent to 1 ton of carbon dioxide removed or reduced from the atmosphere, but some kind of work would have to be done for the carbon dioxide to be reduced from the atmosphere, who would do that work? This is where the other part of the angle comes in, wherein one aspect can be those particular emitters who achieve their emission targets and who have extra can sell those extra in the form of carbon credits to those emitters who are not able to meet their particular targets. This is the graph showing excess, and the excess part comes to the emitter who is not able to fulfill his or her targets. This is the first way to do it. Second way is there would be actually certain organizations would be involved in certain activities which actually reduce the carbon dioxide emissions. So there can be projects which are invested in renewable energy. There can be organizations which indulge into methane capture, reforestation activities, or direct carbon capture. So those entities which would dedicatedly perform this kind of functions would do the actual job of reducing carbon dioxide, and in lieu of these tasks they would get the carbon credits, which they in turn would be able to sell to the other entities, and those entities can trade these carbon credits within amongst each other. So this is the whole concept of carbon markets. Now there are certain types of carbon markets, and based on the way the carbon credits are dealt with, there are two types of carbon markets that exist today. One is the compliance market and other is the voluntary market. Now what is the difference between these two? When we say voluntary market or voluntary carbon market, this are those in which emitters, that is corporations, private individuals and others, buy carbon credits to offset the emission of 1 ton of CO2 or equivalent greenhouse gas. This is where any of these people, corporate entities or any person, can buy credits. Such credits are created by activities which reduce CO2 from the air, such as afforestation, the kind of activities which we saw in the previous slide. All of those entities which are undertaking these activities would be generating credits, and those credits can be then bought by these institutions. So this is the concept of a voluntary market, where a corporation looking to compensate for its unavoidable emissions purchases carbon credit from any entity engaged in these products that reduce, remove, capture or avoid emission. So for instance, in the aviation sector, airlines may purchase carbon credits to offset the carbon footprint of the flights that they operate. This is an example where how the aviation industry participate in the carbon market. Then the compliance market is the next type, which is not set up by private entities but is set up by policies at the national, regional and the international level and are officially regulated. So based on the mode in which they are done, they are divided into voluntary markets and compliance markets, where government policies is what rules the compliance market. These are the different types of carbon markets. But now when we're dealing with this concept and entities could be buying their carbon contributions in the form of carbon credits, can there be certain concerns with carbon trading? Turns out that there are a lot of concerns flagged by experts with respect to these carbon credits, where the UNDP itself points out serious concern pertaining to carbon markets. First is that the double counting of greenhouse gas reductions can happen. So when multiple times trading with respect to these carbon credits happen, multiple counting is a danger that comes with it. Then the quality and authenticity of climate projects that generate credits to poor market transparency is also a major problem, which means that the kind of entities which we saw who would be undertaking the activities to reduce the climate emissions, what kind of quality afforestation are they doing? Is their action even scalable enough to cause an impact? All of these questions also come in with respect to these entities. And then there are also concerns about greenwashing, which means that those companies may buy credits simply offsetting carbon footprints instead of reducing their overall emissions. This is also a great danger, where if you give a company a chance to buy their pledges or contributions of carbon emission, they might just keep buying those carbon credits and have no stoppage altogether at their emission activities themselves. So this is also major issue with respect to the carbon market. So this is a discussion which we try to have on the carbon markets in India. What are its features and what are some of the concerns that carbon credits have? So this is all for discussion today, and we'll meet again with the important articles from the newspaper. Thank you.